Okay, so there was a special cake. Today is November the 11th, 1979. The Pawnee Veterans Organization held their annual Veterans Day dance today at Pawnee in the gymnasium of the old Pawnee Indian School, which has now been converted into offices that are being used by the Bureau of Indian Affairs, rented to them by the tribe. When Aunt Viola and I arrived, it was about 12 o'clock. Not many people had come in yet, but there were a few that were seated in their chairs around the edges of the room. In the center, a large yellow and blue striped canvas or tarpaulin had been spread on the floor. In a short while, Bitsy Barone, who was the spokesman for the day, said that we would be eating in a little while. The food, of course, was being cooked in the community building and would be transported to the gymnasium. He explained to the people that the food would be served from tables on the stage, and they would have to go up on the stage with their trays and their dishes, entering from one side and leaving from the other, and that there was going to be a special order to the proceedings, which he would explain later when more people had arrived. Finally, people began to come in, and a few comments were made about how late the Pawnees are in getting things started. These, of course, were being made by Pawnees themselves around us. And as we sat there, the different people would come by and say hello and shake our hands and ask how we were doing, realizing, of course, that we were there after the recent death of Garland, and being very kind. Finally, enough people were there that Bitsy Barone explained to them that, first of all, the veterans would be first to be served food, and that they would line up and go up on the stage. Then the next group would be the War Mothers. This is a group of Indian women from different tribes. Each tribe, or not all tribes, but many of the tribes have a chapter, and the Pawnee chapter is proud of Mamie Echohawk because she is the state chairman. There were members from the Wichita tribe there of this organization, and the Oto and the Osage, and yes, and one Comanche. Mrs. Wayne Miller, I believe, is the one that had the Comanche tribe War Mothers blanket on. Well, they were to eat first, and then after them would come the singers. They would be served next. Then after that, the visitors from other tribes, and then at last the Pawnees. By this time, there was probably, I'd say there was 100 people, 150 people had come into the room and were seated, getting their dishes out. But before eating, he said that we would have to be sure that we didn't go out in the hall we'd have to stay in the gymnasium and eat, and that we should be very careful not to do that. I presume there had been some problem about eating in the hall before, and they didn't want to repeat the problem, whatever it was. The blessing on the food was asked by Sam Young, Chowie. He said a short prayer. I'm having a question here because Bill Taft Eves also gave a prayer, and his was in Pawnee. Now, I can't recall at what point he prayed, but Sam did also, so now I just don't know which is which. Sam spoke in English. Well, perhaps I will recall it later. But after the prayer for food, then he told the people Bitsy Barone actually said, well, called the people to line up in this different order. And they went up on the stage, and the food there was meat, boiled meat, corn, dried corn cooked, fried bread, various desserts, cakes and pies and donuts, iced tea. They had run out of coffee before Aunt Viola got there, and she had to have iced tea, which didn't please too much. That was and potato salad. They had some potato salad. And then Lois Knife Chief had a cake decorated, which she gave to the war mothers, for the war mothers. And the war mothers, she had asked Mamie Echohawk to cut it, and this was, of course, all announced through Bitsy Barone before we went up on the stage. And then she had done this and was passing it out to different war mothers, and then she was giving small pieces to different people in the audience. Okay, so there was a special cake for the war mothers. Then everyone finally was fed, and the dinner was over, and the singers finally were called out and gathered around the drum. There were about 12 at least there. And interestingly enough, Adam Pratt, there wasn't room for him, and he never did get to sit there. He was sitting over on the bench with two other people that usually sing, and finally they left. I guess there just wasn't enough room around the one drum for as many men as wanted to sing today. They said that they were going to have a special. He announced the way this was going to work. He said there were going to be Bitsy again. Announced that there were going to be a series of a set of war dances. Then there would be a special. But during the war dances, the set of war dances, if anyone wanted to give away anything, they would themselves have to dance on the tail and then do the presentation on their own. The whole idea of this, I think, was to cut down on the number of special songs that tend to slow down the dance, and you can get to the point they're having so many giveaways and special songs that very little dancing is being done. And this was a complaint that Garland used to have, is that there were just constant interruptions with specials, and the dancing was not, which is the main, to many people, the most important thing is the war dancing. So he said that this was how it was going to be done. Now, he also said that he was very sorry, but there wasn't a tail dancer nor a whip man there, that neither one of them had come, and that therefore they apologized very much for this, and the only way they could do it was be to do the dances, just have a straight war dance without these two figures being present. One of the things that was done was to have a special right at the very beginning for the war mothers, and this was requested by John Nice Chief, and he explained that sometime before, someone, I forget who it was, maybe it was Minnie Peters, this was involved, she was a war mother, and she had asked him to play the Gold Star Mother song, but he hadn't been able to. So he had a cold, he said at the time, so he hadn't been able to sing it. But today he was going to sing it, and he wanted he said there were two Gold Star Mothers there that he knew of, and he wanted them to come out and the war mothers to dance. And so this was a very moving song. It's a very beautiful song. Never heard it before, but the old women and all of them were middle-aged, and then some others joined them. But it was all women, and some of them were crying because they'd lost sons or other relatives in battle in some previous war, and they moved around about 4 abreast, taking 3 abreast. And Old Wichita, Lamar, I think is her name, was there, and Minnie Peters' daughter, and her sister, I don't know who that was, and several others, and they moved around, and it was a very emotional moment, and a lot of the people were standing to honor these women who had lost. As John Knifey said, there's not any, they had a real loss. To lose one's son or child is one of the greatest losses. And so that was done, and then after that, money was given away in honor of several people because of this result of this. That was one special I saw. Then another special occurred. There were sets of dancing, as he said. Then another special that happened was one given by Alvin Leading Fox, and this was a round dance. He asked that John C. Matlock carry the flag, and then a great number of his family members, including his wife, who was quite ill. She could not dance, but she stood at the edge of the floor with her daughter, and they moved around and around in the round dance, and many Skeeties, but some other bands members became part of the circle. And after that, Alvin had a giveaway this was in honor of his daughter, who had been in World War II and had died. She died during the war. I don't know whether she died overseas or whether she died here in the United States, but she passed away, so he gave a few things away, and his daughter, Mrs. Blackout, pledged $100, which is a large sum of money, to the veterans for their next year's powwow. In the round dance that always precedes the war dance, there were about 20 to 25 women with shawls representing different tribes besides the Pawnees. There was a group of Wichita women there, and a Wichita man. There were two people from Crow, Mr. and Mrs. Medicine Horse, and of course, his costume was different. He had on a red, looks like underwear, dyed red, long sleeves, long arms, and a crow bustle with a lot of eagle feathers, and two trailers with a total of 12 eagle feathers down the back, and the beadwork, the shape of the beadwork on his arms was different. Armlets was different. It was blue, and his feathers were cut out in a different way on his head. It was a different costume than we're used to seeing in these parts. The total number of war dancers altogether was not great. It was between 8 and 10. Every year it seems to be fewer and fewer. I remember the first time I went to war dance in 61 or 62, January of 62. The entire ring of benches was filled with war dancers. There must have been 20 or 30. The dancers this time, if I can remember all of them, was Nathaniel Wilson, a young man I don't know, Douglas White Clown, Dr. James Howard from OSU, Wildcat, is it Jim Wildcat? Eunice's husband. Sam Young, a Sac and Fox young man whose mother's a Pawnee, like his long hair. I can't think of his name right now. He was in the war. I think he's lost a leg, but he always attends Pawnee dances. And Wichita, Wayne Miller. This is really embarrassing. But as you can see, there were not as many, less than 50% of the dancers were Pawnee. There were several people missing from this dance that I would have expected to be there. Last year, when Garland had a special song for Alec Matthews and Levi Horsesheet, neither one of them were there today. In fact, it seemed to me that it was almost 50-50 between other tribes in the audience and the Pawnees. There seemed to be a lot of people missing. When it came to the four chiefs who were supposed to sit up there in front, they called the four chiefs to come and sit. One was S.D. Adams, Merton Moore, Eves, and only Bill Eves came up, and finally Sam Young sat down, so that only made two chiefs, and that's the first time I've ever seen that happen either. So I don't know what this means, whether there's just a gradual lack of interest in this dance or in dancing or what. But what with not having all the chiefs and not having a tail dancer and a whip man, it was a rather unusual situation for a war dance, a Veterans Day dance. As I said before, Bill Eves was asked to give a prayer, a blessing, and he did this in Pawnee, thank goodness. It was short, but he did speak in the language. The only time the language was spoken all during the day, except for the songs. I left at 4, so I don't know how long the dance continued after that. Auntie and I did not dance, thinking it was not proper to dance so soon after the death of Garland. Auntie pointed out to me, though, that times are changing, because Dina Littleson, whose husband George died recently, she attended Catherine Boton's dance and danced 4 days after his death, which she thought wasn't right. Some money was given to the Wichitas before I left, several times, which is I'm glad to see. Wayne Miller and his wife, who called me on the phone and talked to me and were so kind, a few days after Garland's death, were there, and he said he wanted to talk to me sometime. There wasn't any opportunity today, but maybe sometime in the future. The Veterans Organization, Rousseau Pepin, brought over a check and put it in my hand, and they said he hadn't been able to come over. He couldn't go to the funeral, he said, or he couldn't talk to me at the funeral. He said that he just couldn't go to Garland's funeral. They were very close, and he said he couldn't do it. But he wanted me to have this, which is a check for $25 from the Veterans Organization, of which he is a officer. The other officers there today were Charles, or Chibe Eves, as he's called, and Bitsy, or Raymond Barone, and John Knife Chief. That's 4. I don't know if there are other members or not, but they were the ones that were sitting behind the table, behind the veterans flag, which is a red flag with a black wolf's head on a white field in the center of it, and the American flag. One of the women sitting next to him, Viola, pointed out that there had been some dissension among the group that was cooking or preparing this meal, and that a woman, whose name I didn't catch, I probably know who it is, had not been asked to help prepare or serve because, as explained, she was too bossy. I'm contrasting this Veterans Day dance to some of the ones that I saw when I first began to attend Pawnee dances. I would say that there were roughly half the people there in attendance, and that the factionalism that has existed, not to the great degree that it was, say, in the early 70s, when Garland was head chief, that factionalism that came about at that time with the Secret Five and the trouble within the Business Council is still affecting the attendance of the different dances. The Echo Hawks weren't there. Any of the horse chiefs were not there. The Real Rider family, I didn't see any of them there. And various other families that you would expect to be there were not there. Adam Pratt, who is usually has been a singer, decreasing frequency, although he was there to participate, was not placed at the drum, which is an interesting situation. While others who I didn't recognize, for instance, Jess, the Howell girl, she's married this, oh dear, I can't think of his name, but he's not an Indian. Oh, I can't remember his name, but he's non-Indian, but he's a big Indian. Anyhow, this probably is due to some kind of a jealousy, I would think, or antagonism between John Knife Chief, who was the head singer, and Adam Pratt. Now, I don't know how much of this there is, but John Knife Chief, of course, can decide who sits around the drum and who doesn't. Also, there were a group that I didn't ever observe in earlier years singing was the Pete Moore, members of that family, who traditionally have been away from the state performing and I think living in California maybe, I'm not sure. But they are friends of Knife Chief, and they were seated around a drum. And some people that I had never seen before from other tribes. Philip Matthews and Philip Gober and Philip Jim were there. And Chauncey Matlock. Were some of the Pawnees that were around the drum. Since I left before the dance was over, I would assume that it would have lasted for another hour and a half at least. This is not a complete report of the events of this particular Veterans Day dance. I do not recall whether I mentioned last night, when I was very tired, that there was